Hello and welcome back to another video in the series of Technique Analyzes. In today's episode, which is number 4 in the series, we will have a look at the double poling of Alexander Bolshunov, who's the best distance skier in the world. Let's get straight into it. What is quite typical of Alexander Bolshunov's double poling style is that it looks effortless, and it doesn't always look like he's moving the fastest, while in reality the speed is shocking, and it doesn't even make sense. What creates this illusion? Some people claim it's because of a low cadence, but I actually believe that's a wrong conclusion. His cadence in double poling is actually quite high, but what creates this illusion of lower speed has more to do with how smooth and stable his movements are. This is detail number 1, and maybe the most important keyword when it comes to Bolshunov's double poling: rhythm, timing, and stability. There are no stops in the movements, and it could remind you of an elliptical machine or a wheel in some ways. The cadence is high, but there are no choppy movements, which definitely is cost-efficient. He doesn't move in an explosive way, but rather a smooth, steady, and economical way. As mentioned, his cadence seems to be quite high, although it's not the highest. In double poling, he doesn't have these super extended and stretched out positions the way he has in diagonal. Bolshunov's upper body, and especially the back, seems relatively tight and compact, and he doesn't have the longest range of motion like the way Gerdulin does. However, he still manages to move a long distance per stroke, through effective solutions and other technical details, if not to mention the insanely high threshold power he has. It's important to not forget, the insane capacity and high threshold power is probably the most important reason why this guy is number 1, and to believe that the guy who wins always has the optimal technical perfection and way of movement is not always the case. This is not to say Bolshunov is a bad technician. He is in fact exceptional, but you need to understand that the physiology also plays a huge part. If you have a threshold power of 350 watts or more, it will take you a long way, even if the technique wasn't 100% perfected and polished. His upper body is also extremely stable. He has a slight forward lean of the upper body, but there is not much bowing. He is able to hold back and has an extremely strong core and overall body strength. This slight forward lean of the upper body is the right way to do it, because he manages to utilize the body weight to generate force into the poles, but avoids at the same time the unnecessary and exaggerated lifting and lowering of the center of gravity. So you should have a little bit of forward lean and slight up and down movements, but not too much, and definitely try to avoid excessive bowing, especially in flatter terrain. Stability is important and is in general a sign of a good technique, even though it's certainly not the whole picture. His poles are not planted into the snow with a too broad distance between each other, and they're almost vertical, and a little more in front of the bindings than lower-level skiers, especially in flat terrain and higher speed. The pole position looks to be spot on. His arms and elbows are very characteristic. Just like Klæbo, the elbows are extremely wide, but the end piece of the pole is still being planted into the snow quite close to the bindings, viewed from the front. His hands are wide, although it's the elbow width that is the most noticeable. Viewed from the side, you can see the arms being very close to the body. Petter Northug used to be criticized for having too wide elbows in double poling many years ago, but Bolshunov and Klæbo are actually taking this even further, and Bolshunov has actually even wider arms and even higher elbow position than Klæbo in double poling. Do you have any ideas of what the benefits of the super wide elbow, arm, and hand position could be? For them, it might be an ideal position for generating the most power, but I believe the position where you're able to create the most force also will depend on the specific athlete's individual biomechanics, and it can also be adapted through specific training. If you train with wider arms, your body will adapt to this over time, and this is where you will be able to generate the most power. If you always ski with narrower and lower elbows, on the other hand, the body will adapt to this, and you will probably generate more power in that specific position. So it's not just making a technical change overnight and concluding that the change doesn't work right away. You need to allow the body to adapt to technical changes over time, because muscles, tendons, and the nervous system, etc., must have time to adapt to these gradual changes in biomechanics and movement patterns. Same thing with pole length. You can't just conclude that the change in pole length did or didn't work after just a week. The body needs time to adapt to new positions and new movement patterns. So the optimal arm position could be influenced by individual anatomical and biomechanical factors, but it can also be influenced by simply the habit or where you have or not have your arms. However, it's a very interesting observation that the two best guys have a very similar arm and elbow position, both in double poling and in V2 skating. His elbows are mostly not locked, and there is a certain degree of eccentric muscle work and a so-called flexion-extension pattern in the elbows. In other clips, it can look like the elbows are more locked, but it varies a bit. The definition of a locked elbow can also vary. When I say locked, I don't mean totally locked. There will, of course, be a certain bending there, but there are still big differences from individual to individual in terms of how extreme the bending is. Too much bending of the elbows will, according to many coaches, lead to a poor efficiency over time, and too much softness and elasticity in the elbow region will probably affect the efficiency in a negative way. But also on this detail, there is some debate among the experts and the opinions are kind of divided. Even though he is exceptional, there are a few details one can notice looking kind of weird. Firstly, he has a quite significant case of knock knees. This is probably related to anatomy, so it isn't necessarily something you can do something about, and it's not guaranteed it's a negative thing either. A second detail is the whole region from the shoulders and above, which looks stiff and limited, and the head can at times hang forward, especially when the speed is high. A third detail is one of his arms, at times being wider than the other arm viewed from the front. This is very marginal and probably related to biomechanics, but from this angle it can look a little unsymmetrical. It can also look like one of the arms is slightly lower than the other arm in certain moments, although it's much less of it now than it used to be. Heel lift or not. Bolshunov has often the pressure in the front of the shoe, instead of the heels, and he has a tendency to go up on the toes, even though this motion varies in terms of how pronounced it is. When the speed is lower, he has zero or only marginal lifting of the heels, while in higher speeds he has a quite significant heel lift. He is definitely using the heel lift more than the long-distance skiers. He has also a higher degree of fall in the upper body than the ski classics athletes, although this also depends on the speed. The discussion of whether you should go up on toe or not in double poling seems to be a never-ending debate. According to certain sources, the active up-on-toe move will come at a too high cost, relatively to what you actually get in return. I must say I agree it comes at a higher cost, but at the same time, you will be able to utilize more of your body weight to generate force into the poles, and you will also be able to kind of jump forward and come a longer distance per stroke when doing it. But you can get most of the benefits from the heel lift also through a marginal heel lift that is enough to generate some momentum, but without a too high cost. If we're talking a true super explosive full jumping like kind of technique, then yeah, it will probably cost too much for any race longer than maybe 3 kilometers. But Bolshunov and many other good skiers have a solution that looks to be optimal, where they have the pressure forward in the shoe and have this marginal lifting of the heels, which gives you most of the benefits from a full up-on-toe move, but at a much lower cost. His legs are not totally straight, but not very bent either, and this detail will also depend on the speed and the terrain. Straighter legs are definitely more cost-efficient over long distances, while more bent legs often are used when sprinting. Bolshunov looks to have an angle of the knees that's quite optimal, because he will adjust it according to the speed he's moving at. If the legs are totally straight, it will not be the best, but as a few skiing coaches have pointed out, this straighter legs habit the ski classics athletes have developed may be a part of the sport, where the ski classics guys are actually a notch ahead of the World Cup skiers in terms of development. But it could also simply just be that they're competing in a different format with different technical requirements. Sindre Wiig Nordby, who's a Norwegian technique expert, claims the ski classic skiers have come a further step in the development. This is a very interesting discussion, as he has pointed out. The difference between these two groups of skiers is definitely noticeable. To bend the legs to a significant extent in double poling, does it really improve the efficiency? According to Nordby, it's totally unnecessary to bend your legs. What do I think? I actually think he has good points. Most people can probably perform double poling with straighter legs, but I don't know if it's that black and white. I don't think it's a good idea to aim for totally straight legs as he suggests, but I'd say you could aim for straighter legs to improve the cost of travel over long distances. Straighter, but not totally straight. I think that sums it up pretty well. Next, Bolshunov doesn't extend the arms too far behind the body, but cuts off the motion roughly when they pass the hips. Like I said in the beginning of the video, it's a misunderstanding that he has a low cadence in double polling, and you can also notice this with the relatively short range of motion with the arms. It's not a full swing all the way back, and the arms are also very close to the body viewed from the side, at least in steeper terrain. Sometimes in flat terrain, when the speed is higher, the arms will be a further distance from the body viewed from the side. In addition to a very strong core, it's just as important to be able to use this musculature when double polling. Bolshunov has a very good contact with his back and abdominal muscles. He isn't only using the arms, but is able to utilize the powerful muscle groups in the center of the body to a greater extent than many others. Trying to feel your abdominal muscles a bit before each stroke can be a good way to create this connection. Trying to actively tighten and flex the abs hard is, however, a common and very wrong advice. Try to activate them, but without the tense and unnatural flexing of the abs. One of my favorite exercises for double polling is the ab wheel, but one can use many different exercises to achieve this goal of better neuromuscular control in the center of the body. Bolshunov has the hips pushed forward, and they are in a so-called high hip position, which basically means that he avoids sitting too much with the hips falling backwards. One of the reasons why it's important to be able to activate the core musculature is because this region has a much higher concentration of type 1 or slow twitch muscle fibers than the more type 2X concentration that's more typical for the arms. Slow twitch muscle fibers have way better endurance, so it's quite logical that being able to utilize these muscles to a higher degree will be very smart. Pushing only with the arms will not only be technically ineffective, but also make you tire out way faster than if you're able to activate the core musculature to a higher degree. The ab muscles have in this case a huge potential for generating sustained power over long durations. Training intensity and double polling transferability. Bolshunov is also known for training more in Zone 2, 72 to 82% of max heart rate during low-intensity sessions than many of his competitors. When talking development of double polling specifically, there is a big difference in the effectiveness of Zone 2 versus Zone 1, which is from 60 to 72% of max heart rate, according to the Norwegian Association of Sports Sciences intensity zones. If you're double polling in a way too far off the actual race technique, it won't be transferable. Or at least, it won't work to the same degree as if you had chosen to increase the intensity slightly. By the way, there is another guy who's known for being an above-average good double poller, who's also known for never doing super easy workouts. So to bring everything full circle, what are the most important factors of Bolshunov's double polling? It's probably the stability, the rhythm, timing, and the wheel or elliptical kind of movements that make the technique so effective, in addition to optimal positions overall. All in all, this guy is a brilliant double poller, but what separates him from the pack is first and foremost the extremely high threshold power. His double polling technique is excellent, and there are parts of it you can analyze and learn from. Thank you so much for watching the video, and make sure to like and subscribe.